So let's just dive on in here. Why don't you just give me a little bit of like your background, like a quick overview of like your education and your work experience and whatnot.
Sure. So my background's in computer engineering. I graduated in 2017 from the University of Buffalo, and I'm also a CS master student specializing in machine learning at Georgia Tech. And, back in college, I worked a lot with low-level architectures, a lot of low-level assembly programming. Because of my background, we did a lot of work in electrical engineering. And I've been with Barclays for, I'm close to 7-8 months now. And I work on their data stress team. So our team handles the big data platform for our UK banking business. And I'm sort of like a software engineer, like data analyst, data scientist. My role is like not really defined, but I do a lot of data engineering work, a lot of analytics work for my team as well.
Okay, cool. So why don't you tell us a little bit about like an average day at Barclays Card?
Sure. So we start at around 8 to 9, and because most of our clients are in the UK, they're about 5 hours ahead of us. So once we come in, if there's anybody we have to talk to or converse with in the UK by WebEx or by Skype or something like that, we have about a 4 to 5 hour interval to do so. So we have to make sure we take care of those deadlines the day before or the week before, just to plan ahead. So basically I come in at about 9, do all my usual stuff, get coffee, water, all that stuff, and then I'll check my emails, see if there's anything from the UK that I have to take care of first, and then we have meetings a lot. So my team is not the largest because most of our employees are in the UK, of course. We have about 30 people on my team, a little bit less than that. So a lot of our meetings are on an ad hoc basis, and most of the people I work with are a lot older than me. They're in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. So our meetings are on an ad hoc basis. So every day we don't know like who we might talk to in the team unless there's like a project specified ahead of time. So we get lunch at like 12, and then a lot of my work is around the software engineering side. So a lot of the analysts I work with, we all have our skill sets, and it varies between us. So one of my coworkers, like, he focuses more on data quality and data governance type of stuff, and that's a really important topic in consumer banking. There's so many regulations that you have to take care of in the US and the UK. Two of the other analysts are AWS experts. I'm really good with data engineering, so I built some of the data engineering pipelines for my team. And overall, I do a lot of software engineering work for my team as well. And we work a lot with models as well. So our models are a little bit different from the corporate banking side. We tend to predict things like attrition. That's like a huge topic for us. Or try to predict loan defaults or delinquency rates, try to predict customer spending patterns. So I'm not like a typical software engineer. We don't actually have like one application that we work with. We actually work with a whole bunch of applications, and it's all centered around the entire big data lifecycle.
Okay. And when you're talking models, you're talking like statistical models, right?
Mostly machine learning models.
Okay.
The models that we use in consumer banking, like credit rates modeling, right? Those are very like regression-heavy models. And if we're trying to measure like consumer spending, let's say like for the World Cup or something, Barclays is like a sponsor. So yeah, so if we're trying to measure that, then we could use like regression-based models. We could use like random forests, SVMs, for example. We don't do a lot of work with RNNs, but we will in the future once we move on to AWS processes. We also do a lot of feature engineering because like data quality and governance is like utmost concern for us. We also run like fuzzy logic models, if you're familiar with that.
Yeah.
So that's used a lot in banking as well. So
yeah, it's cool. So why don't you kind of tell us a little bit about how you got from like the computer science background? So you have like the master's and the undergrad and everything focused on computer science. How did you decide that you wanted to go into finance, and kind of how did you make that transition?
My situation might be a little bit different because basically what happened was when I graduated, I basically just wanted to go on vacation. So once I graduated, I came back to New York City, and then I took a few months off just to focus on myself. And then once I came back, I just had like a 3 to 4 month period when I just started focusing really heavy on interviews and trying to practice like my interviewing skills and programming skills and math skills. But first, I wanted to focus on myself. So basically, when I graduated, I had 4 offers after the interview process, and then I went into finance because I felt long term that would be the best career choice if I was thinking from a macro perspective. The other offers I got were all startups actually, but they were of various sizes. So the smallest one actually had only 1 to 10 team members, and then I'm going by like LinkedIn how they do it. And the other had like 10 to 50, and then another one was just really small as well. That one was like about 20-ish as well. So I just felt like going to finance was the best career path. I think starting off, it doesn't matter too much. A lot of people are unemployed now. It's a lot difficult to get a junior level job nowadays, I think. So you should try to work with whatever you can get. But I had some pretty good offers, and I just chose Barclays because I really like the finance industry. I also have a lot of relatives who work in big banks and some in hedge funds. So I think it was a good decision.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about the languages you use? So like what software are you using for doing, models and data controls and stuff like that?
Oh, okay. So for modeling, we use a lot of R, and we use a lot of Python. So one of the things in banking is there's a lot of old software, of course, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of SaaS-based models, and nobody on my team really knows SaaS or cares to understand SaaS. So part of the job is being able to take these really old models and translate into workable Python and R code. I said I do a lot of data engineering as well. So we use Hadoop as our primary data store, and then I work a lot with MPP architecture, so Spark primarily.
Okay.
I work more with PySpark. There are other people in the team who work with like Spark Scala and Spark SQL, for example. We also use like a lot of Impala and Hive. Those like are built on top of Hadoop. And so we use a lot of SQL as well. I use a lot of Bash for scripting. Then I use a little bit of C++ for data engineering.
Okay. So what would you say are the pros and cons of your current job?
The pros and cons. I think I wouldn't label this as a con, but working at a big company, especially as an analyst, you don't begin to get recognition until I think you're at a certain point. I would say about that, maybe not even AVP level, about like VP level. I think you might agree with me on that.
Yeah, I would.
Yeah, so like there are times where I'm talking to people in the UK who work closely with stakeholders, and these people are at like director level, managing director level, and some of them are even like CDOs or chief risk managers, for example. And if we're talking about them for like a very technical project, and in our email signature it says like analyst or something, like they might completely ignore you. And you have to like tag your manager or something, but then they'll give their respects. So that's like the biggest issue. I would say more of the communication aspect, but I work a lot with a lot of great people. They're all older than me too. I just turned 23, and people I work with are like in their 50s and 60s primarily. And so they have a lot of industry experience, so they're really bright.
Okay. Is that just around your department, or do you see that kind of company-wide where more of the people are older and then there's only a handful of younger guys in the bottom?
So I would say that there's a lot of people who are at VP level. I think most people cap off at VP. And the team I'm on at Barclays Card, it's just mostly older guys. If I work more towards Barclays Capital or Barclays IB, for example, I think that these people could be a lot younger. There's just more analysts. So all the software engineers in my company, most of them don't work at Barclays Card in terms of like the data side. They'll be building out like applications like POS systems, so like point of sales systems, and Barclays has a lot of. I think we have like over 500 actual applications that are user facing. So a lot of those guys are older as well. So most of the people on my team, as well as the team in New York City for Barclays Card, they're mostly older consultants.
Okay, that seems similar because in risk management, I've noticed everywhere I go, most of my colleagues are 40 years old or older. And then I come in like at 22, 23, whatever, and then it's like you're working with people that are just like 20, 30 years older than you are.
Yeah, I think most people, they would probably want to gravitate towards startups more. I know that's happening a lot more. You have to be a certain type of person to work in banking, I would say. You'd have to embrace the cultural differences. It's very different from college. If you're like straight out of college and you want that type of lifestyle where it's not like too corporate heavy, then banking probably isn't the correct industry. Like finance in general probably wouldn't be the best industry for you.
Yeah. So what's your dress code for work?
It's business casual, pretty much all the time. I think if you work more towards the IB side, you probably have to wear a suit every day. Not sure like what the constraints about that are, but when I go and see the IB people, they're always in a suit. I've never actually asked them if that's their dress code. I just assumed. So for us, it's just business casual, like dress shirt, dress pants, dress shoes. I tend to wear ties a lot. That's just what I like personally.
Okay.
On Fridays or pretty much whatever you want.
Yeah.
As long as it's too extravagant.
Yeah, we have a similar structure. We have I guess my bank's like casual, but like our team specifically is like, business casual. And then obviously as you move towards like the client facing side, it's suits and ties and the whole 9 yards. So
I have been yelled at a couple times for dressing a little bit too casual. That's what happens.
Yeah, I think that happens a lot. I always see like someone that's a little newer and they're not quite exactly sure where that cutoff is.
Yep.
Okay, so let's dive on in here. You asked me specifically to bring this up on how to find a career in software engineering or finance for entry-level candidates, and then also, and what are the best ways to break into the industry. So I'm interested to see what you think on this.
So the reason I wanted to address this is because I think it's a big issue with newer software engineers starting out and a lot of people who want to major in something like computer science or engineering, and they want to work in software full time in the future. So one thing I would ask them is your goal to make a lot of money, or do you want to move towards a more management area of finance? It might not have to be finance. It could be like project management. It depends a lot on the person. So if I had to give like any advice, because I see a lot of juniors who are struggling to get placed, especially, it was difficult for me too, because in college, I didn't really do like any internships at big firms. I had one where I worked with like AR technologies. So for me, it was like even difficult as well. I think you shouldn't focus too much on what your first job is. Of course, the pay is important and the location is important, but I think after you get your first job, it's a lot easier to progress. Like I get like a bunch of LinkedIn messages all the time from recruiters now because I got my first professional job at Barclays, so I would give that piece of advice for them. And another piece of advice is if you're trying to get into software engineering and or computer science in general and you're doing it for the money, I would shy against that because there are other avenues. I think it's fine if that's your main goal, but there are a lot of other ways to make money. Like I see people who say, should I get into computer science if I just want to make a lot of money? And I'm on Reddit a lot, so I read a lot of these forums.
Yeah.
It's probably not the best decision. There's a lot of majors and there's a lot of career paths, and if your goal is to make like a tremendous amount of money, like maybe like 300K or more within like 5 years or something, that won't happen with most people. So I know people who are really talented who actually make that much starting off, who are working at like big firms like Google and Facebook. And if that's one of your goals, then that's totally fine. But it's really competitive. So you have to make sure that you're really good, or you can progress to a point where you can become really good.
Right. Do you see a giant gap between those that are really passionate about like actually doing the job versus those that are like in it for the money?
So I actually keep in touch with a lot of people from university. And like I used to be like a teaching assistant, right? And when I would grade student submissions, right, the students are like, their skill levels and their commitment is not very high. Like you can see it once you read their code. I think most students, they just choose computer science as a major to like appease their family, perhaps, or they know that it's a solid career path. But if you read their code, a lot of them, they don't know what they're doing at all. Like, they're like FizzBuzz type of question. Like FizzBuzz is it's like an integral computer science question that they'll ask you to make sure that you know what you're doing. And there were times when I was in college and I was working with these students that after reading their code, I was just shocked because they're at junior level and they don't understand like the basic CS concepts. So I think in the finance industry, the people who are making lots of money starting off, they're either traders or they're quants, or they work for a hedge fund, or they work for HFT, for example. I think in banking, the software engineering as well, the salary is really good, but it won't ever be at that point where you can compare it to compensations from Facebook or Google, where they'll offer you like 50K bonuses, like just right off the bat, and like 250K total compensations with stock. It won't ever be at that point unless you work at a place like Citadel or Two Sigma or something like that.
Right. So let's dive into this then. What do you think of the work-life balance at your current job?
I think it's very good. In banking, if you want to move into banking, you can expect like 8 hours, like on the dot, unless you're a trader. I imagine you would have to work a lot more. I know some people who work in like M&A and in trading, and some of them are quants as well. They'll work closer to like 10 or 11 hours.
Right.
So yeah, I think for me in general, if you're like a software engineer at a bank, I could compare it to maybe like a government position with, but not quite as lax. If you want like 40 hours a week, and you don't want that much pressure, then being like a software engineer in the bank is pretty good, I'd say.
It makes complete sense. The reason I ask is because I started with a finance degree, and then I went into financial engineering, and I was thinking like, I'm going to be working like 12 hours a day, going to be making all this money, and life's going to be good. And then as I got into risk management, I started realizing, like, similar to you, like, we work overtime occasionally, but it's really like an 8-hour job. And you have high stress periods, but like the work-life balance is so good. Where I like seeing interviews with guys working at Citadel, and it's like, yeah, you're making a lot of money, but A, cost of living is so high where you're at. And then B, yeah, you're working 10, 11, 12-hour days. Kind of is that trade-off for that money.
Do you work that much now?
No.
Okay.
No way. No, risk management on the quant side is very, it's very like cyclical. So when we have a project, you might be working like late or like some overtime hours here and there, but it's never like 12 hours a day for a week. It's like maybe a day or two that's like 9, 10 hours. And then when like we're slow, it kind of like caps back down to exactly like you come in, you do your 40, you have small projects here and there, but it's never like super intense or stressful.
Yeah, working in the consumer banking side rather than corporate banking, or less so of the front office side, I think that it's going to be a lot more relaxed, I want to say.
Yeah.
And, there's just so many different career paths, even in just like finance. Like, forget the computer science or software engineering. Like, if you graduate with like an economics degree or like a finance degree and you want to work in finance in, like, say, like New York City, there's so many different avenues that you can pursue, like accounting or venture capital or audit or compliance, or just to name a few. So
yeah, I learned a lot about that because I always thought coming out, like, there was like the investment banking track and then like the trading track. And then that's why like I like to interview you, because it's like you're doing computer science banking focus, where I'm like working on the risk quant side. And then I discovered people are working like an operational risk, which is like, or operational research, where they're like doing decision making. And then you have all these different jobs like you never really think about until you actually get into the industry. And then you realize like, oh wow, there's a lot of different options and avenues I could have taken.
Yeah, so in my role, it's a little bit different because I work closely with teams that are in compliance and in risk and in audit and sales and financials and customer servicing, for example. They all have like data needs, and they all have questions about the data and metrics that they want answered. So even so, like, I still work a lot with risk as well. And even as far as our models are concerned, they're not so much more statistical models as they are machine learning focused, I would say.
Okay.
I know what you mean as far as the risk aspect. I'm actually trying to move into the algorithmic trading risk side, actually.
Okay. So what would you say your biggest problem is that you constantly solve working as like doing data engineering?
Doing data engineering. The biggest problem would probably not be on the technical end. I would say if you work for a bank, it's really difficult to get approvals. So if you wanted something approved, that could take a while. And I've heard stories where, I'm not sure how true it is. I was just told this by some of the other analysts. There are times where you can build out a software platform or a software application and have it submitted, and it will go through an entire testing phase, right? And that could take like up to a year or more just to get that approved. And then if there's flaws with your application, it could go back, and then it would have to re-go that entire process again. So on the data side, it's similar because there's so much data, especially in consumer banking, that focuses on so many different areas. So the data that I work with is merchant data, so like corporate cards customers, terminal users. So terminals are like the machines that you swipe on, right? And loans and mortgages, and actual consumer credit card customers that we have a lot of in the U.S. So the data we might be working with needs to be requested by us from a different team in the UK, or a different team maybe in the US, for example, and that takes a long time.
Yeah, that makes sense. How big is your data? Because one thing I noticed in grad school is you always had these really nice small data sets to work with. And then as we moved into like the real world, we have data sets of like 100 gigabytes, and you're trying to process this in R or something, and then it's like you have server lag, and then you have like disconnection with internet sometimes, and things don't work as well.
Yeah. So in consumer banking, I believe the data almost always has to be relational once you're working with it. So how do I explain this? Let's say once the data is collected, right? There's so many different avenues that can be collected, and then we can isolate these into their source systems. So that would be like Oracle or MS SQL or Oracle, for example. And then all that gets processed, and then that will move into a different ADS, as we call it. It stands for Authoritative Data Source, and then that will undergo a different pipeline. And then at the end of the day, the final warehouse that it's going into is Hadoop. So overall, if we're talking about all the data from all three of Barclaycard's businesses, that's like many, many petabytes worth of data. And the processes that we built are both OLTP based and OLAP based. So OLTP is like online transaction processing. It's more about the business itself and working with the real-time data. And OLAP is more of like batch analytics. So we're trying to make long-term business decisions from our data itself. So in total, it's just so much data. Like I wouldn't actually even know. Like I've worked with, for example, like some of the models, we worked with data from timestamps from like the past year or like the past 6 months. And that's not gonna be a lot, but there are also times where we've worked with all the transactional data from credit card transactions, and that could get up to tens of billions of records.
Yeah, they get huge. And in grad school, did you guys work with smaller data sets, or did you guys have access to large kind of populations?
Well, I just started grad school very recently, but when I was in an undergrad, the most amount of data that I worked with probably didn't exceed a few gigabytes. And I took a lot of data-related courses as well, but those never exceeded a few gigabytes at all.
Okay, makes sense. And then in your current job, do you know are you guys focusing only on U.S. cards, or are you guys doing global portfolios? Because your data span across multiple continents.
It does. So as far as cards are concerned, so our corporate credit cards, that's actually the only one of our businesses that has U.S. clients. So like loans and mortgages, that's all UK-based customers, and all of our terminal customers for our merchant services division, that's all UK-based. So as far as cards are concerned, that's both US and UK, and maybe some other countries as well. Maybe in I know where Barclays is pretty big in the Middle East and Africa region, EMEA. So maybe we have customers there as well. But as far as corporate cards, that's the only one of our businesses that's US and UK based.
Okay, that makes sense. So do you have any other advice you would give students on trying to get into the banking sector as a whole?
If you're starting out, I think you should know the proper dates. So one of the best ways to break in is always to do an internship. And I think internships in banking industry in general are probably easier to get than other places. I know in investment banking, it might be totally different because they try to recruit from specific schools, right?
Right.
So if you can do an internship, there's a really high chance that you'll get a return offer. I mean, most of the people I know who are interns, they definitely get a return offer. You'd have to screw something up really badly. But if you're on the software engineering side and you want to go into banking, I think the general term is called a tech analyst, and there's a lot of those internship type of roles. You should be targeting the dates between, I think, September to December is when they do heavy recruiting. And one thing that I learned the most, that I think is the most important, is networking. If you can network with your current students at your university or previous alumni, or go to a lot of banking-sponsored events, then that would be great for you. I know there are some firms that have a lot of I would say community service events. I know Barclays has a lot of those. I know like JP Morgan, they have a lot of hackathons as well. And I know like there are some other firms like Citadel that have they sponsor hackathons as well. So I think just being able to do the research is an important part of it. As far as software engineering goes, just focus a lot on interview prep, I would say. Make sure your resume is on point. If you actually look at like software engineer's resume, it's like the same format. It should be the same format. It's always like, let me pull mine up. It's always like your name, your experience, your skills, and then your education, and then your projects, right? Well, I see a lot of people with really bad resumes, but they don't know that they have bad resumes. So try to get it proofread by somebody. And if you're a software engineer and you don't have that much internship experience or work experience, try to focus on your projects, and maybe you can do something like research or something, or maybe a co-op, because that would help a lot. And focus a lot on your skills. Like, don't BS your skills, for example. Always, like, during the interview prep, just try to focus on one language. You don't have to learn something like interviewing for Jane Street. You don't have to learn like WCAML or something like that. Something ridiculous. It's, like Java, C++, Python. Make sure you're good with one of them, and then if you're good with like data structures and algorithms, try to focus on that. If you're not, definitely focus on that. If you're already good, then maybe try to practice online at like HackerRank or LeetCode. Those are usually some pretty good sites. And by the time you graduate, have a good understanding of what you want to do, because that can change all the time. I mean, you could be working and you could want to work at a different industry. So that actually happened for me. I'm at Barclays now, but I want to transition more into the quantitative development side. I've actually gone on a lot of quant dev interviews. So if you have any questions on that, I'd be happy to answer those. So yeah, that's just it. There's not much more I can say except try to be proactive your junior and senior years.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want to dive into that quant development questions? Yeah. I'm curious because I've done this from like the financial engineering aspect, but never from like the actual coding side of it.
Yeah. So I think that you released a video before that you explained the different types of quant roles that you can assimilate into. Quant dev is a little bit different. I think it's closer to actual software engineering than it is to quant finance. So I've been on like 3 of them myself, but all final rounds. And one thing I learned is you can be good on the finance aspect. You can be good on the mathematics aspect, the statistics aspect. Be good at brain teasers, for example. The part you really just have to be excellent at is problem solving and doing well on the coding portion, the technical part. And I would suggest for quant dev roles to focus a lot on Python. So the 3 that I went to were all Python based. And then second would be C++. And one thing I noticed is that they like to use a lot of questions from Big 4 interviews. So like the Microsoft interviews and like the Google interviews, they'll reuse a lot of those questions.
Okay.
So it's actually very similar to like a regular interview at a big firm like Google or Facebook.
So what's the hardest question you had to answer in one of those interviews?
The hardest question? Let me think. Probably some sort of dynamic programming question that's like a LeetCode hard. But one of the things I've noticed is that the actual sheer number of questions that they ask you is like a lot more than regular software engineering interviews. I've been asked like up to 20 questions from like 3 to 4 interviewers in one day. So it's crazy. And that ranges from like programming to math and statistics and brain teasers. So I think the hardest from a programming perspective is probably like one of the dynamic programming questions. The difficult ones from the math or statistics side was I had to derive this differential equation. It wasn't. I don't remember if it was like the Black-Scholes or anything. I don't have that much experience with the quant analytics side.
Yeah.
But they decided to ask me that anyway. That was really tough. So the interviews I went to were one at a big bank like Barclays, another at a global markets company, and another one was at a top quant fund, I guess you would call it, or quant shop.
Yeah.
So I've been asked like some pretty tough brain teasers as well that I don't even remember because I've been trying to clear it from my head. But I do have a book that's helped me a lot for quantitative development. Let me see if I can find it. It's called... Oh yeah, it's this one. So it's the one by Dan Stefanica. I'm not sure if you've seen this book.
Yeah, I've seen that book.
Yeah, it's like 150 frequently asked questions. Yeah, this book is really good, actually. But I would not suggest getting into it if you aren't familiar with the stochastic calculus side or a lot of the statistics sides or the mathematics side. There's just like so many topics that they cover. So this is a pretty difficult book. Although a lot of the brain teasers that I've seen in this book I was asked in the interviews themselves.
Okay, that's good to know. So did you decide to get a master's because you want to change directions, or is that just because you see it as like a requirement now moving forward, or kind of like what was the reason for that?
I think it's an advantage, but not that huge of an advantage. If you want to work in quantitative finance, for example, just as an example, I think you need at least a master's. I only know one other person who has a bachelor's, but that person also has like a decade of industry experience. So I think for him it's different. I'm interested in the quantitative finance side, but the part of the industry I'm most interested in is actually autonomous trading.
Okay.
So I'm very interested in like algorithmic trading, for example. There are just some roles where you would need at least a master's, like data science, for example. Although I do know a lot of people with bachelors, but nowadays you need at least a master's and PhD. And machine learning research, of course, as well. That's another avenue where you probably need a PhD. Probably can't get hired with a master's. I just see it as an advantage. And there are some really good programs. Like the program I'm in right now, I can actually do it part-time while staying here. So that's one of the reasons that I wanted to apply this program. So,
do a lot of your colleagues have like graduate degrees, like master's and PhD, or is it?
Oh, so the people I work with, they're a lot older, and most of them have masters.
Okay.
At least there's a few that have PhDs, but most of the consultants, it ranges. A lot of them have undergraduate degrees in a quantitative field like computer science or mathematics. And then there's a number of colleagues that I work with who actually have MBAs and PMP certifications because they wanted to work more towards the consulting side of the business and more of the management side of the business. One of my directors, he's got a MBA from MIT, and he has a quantitative background as an undergraduate degree. And then my direct line manager, he has, I think he has a bachelor's and a master's as well, both in quantitative disciplines. So most of the guys I work with have masters. Two of the analysts have masters, and then one of the other analysts just has a bachelor's in computer engineering with me.
Okay. Yeah, I see like quantitative finance, it's basically the minimum's like the master's now.
Yeah.
And then even like more and more people are just getting PhDs. And so it's getting harder and harder, like on our side, to get pushed ahead because it's such a high threshold just to get in.
Yeah. I think you wanted to ask me whether or not I would consider like switching my bachelor's and master's if I had to.
Yeah. If you had to redo college,
either
undergrad and grad, would you choose different degrees?
I would choose different degrees and schools for my undergraduate degree. So I went to school, University of Buffalo. It's about 8 hours away from New York City. I probably would have went to a school that I can network better, but was also closer to New York City, so visiting wouldn't be a huge issue, and doing things like internships wouldn't be a huge issue. So a school like Rutgers, for example, or RPI, or maybe to a school like maybe like a UC school, because there's a lot of opportunities for software engineering in California. I probably wouldn't have gone to a school that was so far. As far as the degree itself, I probably would have majored in something like computational finance instead of engineering. I think my engineering degree probably wasn't worth it. I could have maybe majored in computer science. That would have been a lot better. It would have been a lot easier. Not so many science and math courses. There's just so many more of those. Plus, most software engineers, they probably have CS degrees anyways.
Yeah, makes sense.
Engineering is a lot of E as well. So that doesn't help you that much unless you're trying to move into a field like embedded systems or systems engineering, which is very broad, or maybe like FPGAs, which is interesting as well. I probably would have majored in computer science, but if they had like a computational finance program, I probably would have majored in that, actually. I don't think most undergraduate schools have financial engineering programs. I think
they're starting to pop up. I saw a few of them, and I was actually shocked because there was not any programs like 5 years ago.
Yeah, that'd be really cool, actually. If there was a financial engineering program, it might just be called like computational finance. I see a lot of computational finance schools. So probably computational finance would be a lot more interesting. I didn't know about that entire aspect until I joined, because that's something I've been trying to focus on for the past 6 months. I probably would have chosen something different. If I worked at a startup, I probably would have said I probably would have majored in CS or majored in statistics.
Okay, makes sense. And I think earlier you touched on an important point too, which is looking at what you want to do for your goal.
Yeah.
Right? Because it sounds like you like the quantitative technical side of the industry.
Yeah.
Where I think a lot of students get mixed up is that they think that getting like a business degree and making a lot of money is the same as being quantitative and technical. But I think there's definitely a big divide between like those that are wanting to be management and those that are wanting to be like statisticians, data engineers, data scientists, risk management. Like we're a very different route from I think a lot of traditional finance and business students, where it's like an MBA would help you out far more than trying to go down this like rabbit hole of like financial engineering and more like the technical side.
I think that you could always move into management at some point, but if you want to do that, try to do so as soon as possible, because I know a lot of people who are software engineers, but they move towards project management. They make a lot of money and they have a lot of software engineers who work under them. Just try to do so at a certain age. Like if you're past 30, I don't see a point in trying to make that switch. Like I would just continue with software engineering, and I think management itself is like it's a tricky term, because you could not really be a manager, but you could have a lot of people who work under you. Mm-hmm. But I know for a fact that if you work in the banking industry and you want to make the most amount of money just to like maximize your earning potential, you probably have to move into a management spot at some point. And with the management position, you'll probably get a huge promotion in terms of job title. Like I think a lot of directors and managing directors, they have done a lot of management work.
Right. Yeah, I see that throughout the industry. I met a guy actually at Michigan who had a financial engineering degree from Columbia, And then he was going to Michigan for an MBA, and I looked at the guy like, why are you getting an MBA? This makes no sense. You have this amazing financial engineering degree. And he said he'd worked in the industry for a few years and realized he wanted to be on the management side. But making that switch was so hard because he didn't have like the pedigree and the degree that he actually had to go back for the MBA just to make that transition to the other side.
That's kind of odd.
Yeah.
My opinion on that is I don't really have an opinion on that because I'm not at that point. I might want to be at a management level at some point. Probably not. I like development a lot more. But is an MBA actually required, in your opinion, to be able to become a manager?
To be honest with you, I think yes. So what I have found out, which I think is kind of sad, is a lot of times in the industry, it's not about how good of a manager you are.
Yeah.
It all comes down to the pedigree. So I see guys that are like, oh, I went to Wharton and I have this MBA from Wharton, and like they brag about it. But when you start getting into like just banking and finance, since my background's in finance, I'm like amazed at how many things they just don't know. And then from the management perspective, they don't even have, I guess, the people skills to really like be a great manager. And I think that's kind of a definition of like management is you don't necessarily have to be an expert on the technical sides, but you should at least have like that, like people skills, and you can help people organize projects and get things done. So I think the easiest route, at least, to getting into like management, especially in banking, is always going to like a target school.
Yeah.
So like even like Michigan was a great school that I went to, but at the end of the day, like being in financial engineering and applied economics, nobody cared who we were. But when they'd come for like the MBA programs, you'd have like Goldman Sachs and Lazar's and JP Morgan.
Michigan's actually a really good CS school as well.
Yeah.
I think they're a target school as well.
Yeah. So I always was jealous because, like you're saying, right? So in financial engineering, you're kind of stuck. The original program was between engineering and the business side.
Yeah.
So we would go to these job recruiting fairs for the engineering school and like computer science. Mm-hmm. And it was awesome. You'd have like Google and Apple and like everyone's excited. Yeah. And as soon as you said like, I'm a financial engineering student, it was like, oh, thanks for coming, but we're really looking for like computer science majors. And then on the flip side, you go to like the business career events and they would like wine and dine you and have like really nice food. And then they'd be like, oh, you're not an MBA student? Like, thanks, but we're going to pass. We're looking for someone with a business background.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of that weird, like you're saying, right? You need to pick one side of it instead of trying to skate the middle is kind of hard.
I do have another question. Do you think the people who work at startups who are project managers and lead teams of like 5 to 10, would you consider them capable of being managers in financial institutions?
I would say yes, as long as you have some tie to the finance industry. So like, for example, if you were like a project manager at like a fintech company,
yeah,
I think it'd be really easy to jump from fintech to like a bank or even like an investment firm because you kind of have like the basic finance knowledge, but then at the same time, like they're really, really hiring you for that project management skill. And I think those skill sets are easily transferable across industries.
What are your thoughts on hedge funds? How, as far as difficulty and whether or not you should go to one? I know the worth-life balance is pretty shitty, but
yeah.
What are your thoughts of going to hedge funds like 5-10 years down the line, or maybe 3 years down the line, or if you should or not?
Yeah, so I started out kind of like the alpha male Wall Street 1980s, wanting to be like that trader, and then I got really like obsessed with like the financial engineering side for a while, and I always wanted to work at a hedge fund. I thought it was like the dream job. And then as I started interviewing around the industry, I started realizing kind of the pros and cons. So the pros are if you end up at a smaller firm where there's not a lot of people, but it has good returns, you can make like 300 to 350 starting. But the cons are job security is really low.
Oh, do you know there's a story at some top hedge funds that they'll cut the bottom 10 to 20% every quarter.
Yep.
Is that true?
Yeah, that's true. So they do that, and even some of the old investment banks used to do that, where it's like you cut the bottom, And then the other issue is that hedge funds, if you look at most of them, they blow up after a few years.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you might be making, say, $350 a year, and then 2 years in, you get laid off. Or the firm goes bankrupt. And so now it's like you're trying to find a hedge fund, and from what I've seen, it's hard to find other hedge funds that are willing to pay those prices. And then again, the long hours, it's more grueling work. Most hedge funds that I've seen, depending on the side you work on, there's like traditional hedge funds, and they're more focused on like Excel. So you have like guys just going in Excel and VBA. And like for me, that's just, that's a deal breaker. I don't want to deal with that. And then on the flip side, if you have the quant funds, I think it'd be really exciting because you're doing a lot of programming and then you're actually implementing in all the theories. So I think hedge funds are good in many ways, but from looking at like work-life balance and compensation, I wouldn't make the move. Like for me, it's just not the right payoff. And even looking at companies like at Citadel, for example, everyone talks about Citadel. My current compensation, I think, is comparable. And so it's like, I'm looking at like, well, if I made a little bit more at Citadel, but I'm working like 50% more hours, is it really worth kind of that trade-off?
What are your thoughts on HFT companies? Still a good idea or no?
I'm actually reading a book on this right now. So high frequency trading, I think, is really interesting. I think it's really, really competitive. But from 2000 to like 2012, there was I guess, an edge, so an unfair trading advantage for very specific firms. So even if you started up a firm and even if you were like really good, you would be getting pushed out on the way that the exchanges are set up. So,
I read about this. They regulated it, right?
Yeah. So now they've added more regulation to fix the issues. I think it's good. I think high frequency trading would be awesome to get into, especially as a programmer side, because all of it is going to be based on speed. So it's going to come down to investments on servers and programming. So I think if you're like in an engineering side, it would be a great area to join. But then again, you still have some of that, like if the companies are smaller, you might be lacking the stability in the company. But again, if you worked at like Two Sigma, Citadel, great benefits, great company stability, and I think a lot more stimulating than working at like a large bank.
Yeah, that's good info. How long have you been at your current position?
The current company I have been for almost 3 years, and then I've worked in risk for about 5.
Wow, that's wild. Are you thinking of moving towards maybe like a different bank, like a bigger bank, or maybe more towards Quant or anything? Or you're comfortable with it?
I'm pretty good where I'm at. So I started out with a small regional bank.
Yeah.
It was okay. And then I realized my pay could increase significantly from moving to New York City. So I moved to there, worked for Boss Consulting, and I consulted for some of the world's largest banks. So we actually worked in the credit card industry doing modeling. So it's really cool because we had like the geography, like we were hitting Thailand and Russia and like Mexico and the US. And then I switched to currently Santander, and they're out of Madrid, Spain. But we have like a North America division now that's so big that we don't really interact with Spain anymore. But I like it because we have like the big bank feel because our corporate head is so large. But at the same time, you have kind of like that small team dynamics and feel, and there's not as much like politics to deal with. Yeah. So, and I've actually played with the idea of like, I'm like, well, I really want to go to the investment side, like high frequency trading or hedge funds. And then I just keep struggling, like, how do you jump from risk management at a bank to getting into those? And then also location. So I currently live in Dallas, and I like it because cost of living is so cheap. But then on the flip side, New York City has like an infinite supply of quant finance jobs. But yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, sorry. Have you ever thought of actually moving into trading?
I have, but so there's a few aspects of it. I wanted to be a trader originally, and then I started realizing they started splitting all the trader roles. So for example, if you work at a small firm, you can do everything. You can do like the programming, you can do the trading, and you can do like the quantitative like strategy and research. But I actually went and sat on a trading floor in Chicago at a derivatives market, and they like had it split. And they said most banks now, they get so large, they split everything. So they have guys, again, dress code is like shorts, t-shirts, like there's guys like slouched all out just coding away. And they were just the computer science guys, so bachelor's degrees, but really, really good at what they did. And then they had traders who were just essentially guys sitting at a computer, like monitoring the models and kind of making tweaks and adjustments. And then the third guy, they only had one, and he was the actual quant doing like the research portion. So for me, I think it's hard because for me, I can't internally split the strategy from the trading. And so I think once they start doing that, it makes it, I don't know, not as exciting. Like I want to be able to program a little bit. I want to be able to work on the theory and the research. And I also want to be able to like do some active trading. And then after interviewing a buddy of mine who I interviewed in a different video, he was talking like the stress levels are just like through the roof. And he was having like health issues with it as well. And so I'm looking at it like, well, if it's that stressful just managing a small book, working for these big firms managing like billions of dollars and like he was saying he lost like $10,000 to $20,000 a day from like bad trades. And then they had trades that went south that were like 100,000. So it's like thinking like you screwed up and you lost 100,000. I'm sure you get used to it, but I don't know. I've thought about actually starting a firm doing trading, but it's something I'd have to like really research and make sure like all your ducks in a row, or like the company you go to work for would be really solid.
Oh, so you're starting your own firm?
I would like to. I don't know if I ever will, though.
I was thinking about starting my own algorithmic trading platform, but that's something I've been trying to look into for a long time.
Okay.
I'm still learning more about backtesting and all the APIs for Python in order to do that. So my goal right now is to actually build out a platform where I can build my strategies on AWS and do a little bit of that myself.
Have you seen Quantopia?
I have Quantopia. Yeah. That's an interesting site.
Okay. Yeah, I know a lot of guys will build stuff on there and use it, or they use Interactive Broker. Interactive Broker, I think.
It's the actual trading platform.
Yeah, it's a trading platform.
Yeah, is that what most people use?
Yeah, a lot of quants are using Interactive Broker because I think the fees are low. And you can program and set up algorithms to actually do all the trading for you.
I've been looking into that, just learning more about their APIs and how it all works and how I can connect it to AWS. But that's my goal for now. I wouldn't mind just running like a successful algorithmic trading platform and not having to work at all.
Yeah, I think that's a dream for a lot of quants. Is like it'd be nice to set up a firm where it's like you come in, right? You have all your trading going on, you're constantly like managing it, but it's not super intensive.
How much capital do you think you would need to get that up and running if you were to start your own firm?
A lot. So there's advantages. So first of all, there's costs. Like legal costs usually cost about $10,000 to $20,000 to set up a hedge fund. For example, like a trading organization, and get through all the legal hoops because you have to have like licenses to do trading and get signed up on exchanges and all that. I've heard though, if you have a really good strategy and like you can prove that you're making consistent alpha, so you're making good profits, that it's easier to get capital because people want to get into these. But like a lot of people always say like, oh, I'm going to trade my own money into it. And I'm like, even if you had $100,000 and you're making 10% a year, you're only making $10,000. So it's like you really, to profit in trading, you really have to scale it up. So I mean, if you have like 50 million or 100 million, then if you had 10%, it's like, oh, I could pay myself, quite a bit of money, and I could hire a few other guys to do like the legal paperwork and the governance and all of that. So it takes quite a bit. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And as always, until next time.